Well, welcome to Quarantine History of Otter Tail County. I'm your host, Chris Schulke of the Otter Tail County Historical Society. And today's topic is medicine, which is very timely, obviously, through the situation we're going through right now in our country, the pandemic. But I want you to put yourself in 1870 rural Otter Tail County. So close your eyes for a second. Imagine it is 1870. You're a Norwegian immigrant with a wife and two small children and a third on the way. You've just made the long and arduous trip from Wisconsin with all your worldly possessions in one wagon and to claim a homestead in Norwegian Grove Township. So you finally made it. But one cold, rainy March night, inside your leaky log cabin, one of the children becomes ill with a hacking cough. She's also burning up with fever. Well, you look to your wife for help, as she's always the one who deals with family illnesses, but she doesn't look quite right either. And then you realize that the third member of the family is about to be born. You're in a new country. Your English is at best broken, and you are miles from the nearest doctor. What do you do? Scenarios like this were actually quite common during pioneer days in Otter Tail County. But unlike today, where no matter where you are literally only minutes from a modern medical facility, pioneers were basically on their own. So the scarcity of trained doctors meant that pioneers had to develop their own means of survival. Now, most families had a rudimentary knowledge of home remedies that were orally taught and passed down from generation to generation. And for cases they could not handle, families would call upon a person who was more skilled and knowledgeable in the ways of folk medicine. Now, one of the more arcane tools in the Historical Society's collection is a device known as a scarifier. A scarifier is a bloodletting tool. They were used in ancient Egypt and Greek civilizations, persisted through the medieval, Renaissance, and Enlightenment periods, flourished in Arabic and Indian medicine, and through the Industrial Revolution. And people were bled for every imaginable ailment, from fevers to back pain, headaches and rheumatism, fractures, and a host of other ills. Bloodletting was based on the ancient belief that blood and other bodily fluids contained humors, whose proper balance was essential to good health. Sick people had an imbalance of their humors, and so bloodletting was thought to restore that balance. And the practice persisted into the 19th century, and actually many pioneer immigrants brought scarifiers with them to America. Now, bloodletting was actually part of a series of harsh treatments used for hundreds of years. Other treatments, such as blistering, which was placing caustic or hot substances on the skin to draw out infections, and purging, which is ingesting dangerous plants or chemicals to induce vomiting or to purge the bowels, were commonly used in America. The harshness of these methods eventually led to the development of more humane medical practices, such as homeopathy. The foundation of homeopathy was nutrition, exercise, minimal medicine, and human relationships. Homeopathic practices were especially evident in the treatment of the mentally ill. Now, the late 19th and early 20th centuries saw considerable growth in state-sponsored treatment of the mentally ill. In previous decades, the insane were dealt with by confining them to prison-like settings or poorhouses where neglect and abuse were common. a new breed of physician sought more progressive methods of treatment by the mid-19th century. And one of the most influential figures in changing the mental health landscape was Dr. Thomas Kirkbride. He advocated for more humane treatment of patients. In fact, he felt the mentally ill were suffering from illnesses that could be treated and even cured. While putting theory into practice, Kirkbride developed a moral management plan that included new architectural concepts. His plan in his asylums called for a central administration area flanked by patient wings with setbacks to allow for maximum light and ventilation. He also encouraged patients to work, as that provided a sense of purpose and responsibility that helped regulate the mind as well as improve physical fitness. Now, Kirkbride's moral management plan was at the heart of what the state of Minnesota wanted with the Fergus Falls State Hospital. Opened in 1890, the hospital's first superintendent, Dr. Alonzo Williamson, was on the staff of the Middletown State Homeopathic Asylum for the Insane in Pennsylvania before coming to Fergus Falls. And in his first report before the Minnesota State Board of Trustees, his homeopathic background is evident. He said, "Milk is the main special diet in this hospital, and we prefer to give it hot. Next in importance is rest. All new patients are immediately placed in bed upon admission. So through the complementary forces of milk and rest, we have been able to largely dispense with every kind of physical restraint and have not used 1 grain of any narcotic." A more traditional type of folk medicine incorporated the use of herbs and food. Now think about it. Even today, when we get a cold or the flu, what is one of the first things that we ask for or people say you should have? Chicken soup. But chicken soup from a can was nothing or is nothing like the chicken soup our great-grandmothers made from scratch. Now, Otter Tail County had its share of herbalists. Some were labeled quite eccentric, yet if there was a problem, they were the ones called. And while most worked in obscurity, there are a few that we have some details about. The Boltons were among the first settlers in Deer Creek Township. And according to an account in the Deer Creek Centennial, the family included a number of sons and 1 daughter. But the one whom all the old settlers fondly recalled was simply known as Granny. Now, Granny Bolton was skilled in the art of healing and was always sent for when someone was very sick. When she first came into a sick room, she demanded the patient's tongue. She literally took it in her hand and examined it and dug into it to ascertain how deep the coating was. She then prepared 2 teas, one containing belladonna and the other aconite. Belladonna and aconite can be quite poisonous, but used correctly, they do have healing benefits. The herbs were then prepared in 2 cups, and the patient was required to hold 1 in each hand and drink from them alternately. When finished, they then had to drink a cup of senna tea. Now, if the symptoms persisted, the patient was then wrapped in ice-cold sheets. So sure was Granny Bolton of her methods that her services were frequently sought after throughout the area. Another well-known Otter Tail County herbalist and healer was Tumalai Township pioneer Olava Wick. A widow when she immigrated with her daughter and son-in-law from Norway in 1866, Olava treated all types of maladies, but she was especially known for her ability to concoct salves and lotions to treat wounds and infections. And there are actually several well-known accounts of her work. On one occasion, Ostad Township farmer Eric Bergerud severely burned his hand in a fire. Local doctors did not think they could save the hand and recommended amputation. Bergerud sought out Mrs. Wick for a second opinion, and she treated the hands for many weeks. She not only saved Bergerud's hands, but he was able to continue to work on his farm. On another occasion, a boy near Barrett nearly severed his hand with an axe. A doctor said the wound was so bad that blood poisoning would soon set in and recommended amputation. Well, the boy's mother put her faith in Olava Wick, who dressed and bandaged the hand. Her treatment worked as the hand healed without complications. Now, perhaps Olava Wick's most famous case happened during the Great Blizzard of January 23, 1873. Civil War veteran Matthias Halverson lived on a homestead just south of Elizabeth. He was hauling wood to a farmer out on the flats when he became caught suddenly in the Great Blizzard. He became disoriented, and for 2 days and a night, he was in the middle of that horrific blizzard. The only way he could save himself and his 2 oxen was to keep moving. Well, somehow, he finally made it back to his cabin, but his legs were badly frozen. His wife tried to make him comfortable, but there was only so much she could do. A doctor from Fergus Falls finally made it to the cabin and said the damage was simply too great. He advised Matthias be sent to St. Paul to have both legs amputated. Now imagine how his wife must have felt. Matthias and Marie had been married less than a year, and how her husband, a wounded Civil War veteran, would become an invalid because of frostbite was beyond reckoning. They didn't like this prognosis, so they sought out Olava Wick. Mrs. Wick stayed at the cabin for several weeks as she treated Matthias's legs. And after a while, the treatments worked, and she was indeed able to save his legs. Unfortunately, the toes on one foot were beyond saving, and they had to come off. Since there were no surgical instruments in the cabin, Olava had her son-in-law fashion a homemade saw by chiseling teeth in a section of wire rim from a hoop skirt. And with no anesthetic or even liquor to dull the pain, Olava proceeded to insult Matthias to the point that he forgot about his feet. And at that point, she sawed off his toes. Matthias Halverson survived and told his story to the Fergus Falls Daily Journal in 1936. So while Olava Wick and Granny Bolton carried on long-standing folk traditions, there were other people who developed more dubious methods. And one such person was a woman named Linda Berfield. Now, the Berfield family moved from Carver County to Star Lake Township in 1875 when Linda was 8 years old. From the start, it was clear Linda was a different child. Her rural school classmates regarded her as queer, and although she was very intelligent, she was said to be haughty and high-strung, and spent many hours conversing with herself instead of playing with the other children. When Linda turned 18, she married Irwin Perry, a livery stable owner in Fergus Falls. And according to a retrospect on her life in the July 5th, 1938 Fergus Falls Daily Journal, Linda was labeled socially ambitious and was determined to mix with a better class of people. Apparently, her appetite for expensive things got the Perrys into financial trouble, so in 1897, they moved to Minneapolis with their 2 children. Within a year, she filed for divorce, claiming that Irwin had abandoned her. So she soon began seeing a man whose we refer to only as Captain Hazard. The journal article described Captain Hazard as having a marital career that, quote, had been marked by certain details not exactly orthodox. Regardless, the captain and Linda married, and she did take the last name Hazard. So while in Minneapolis, Linda began contemplating the nature of human health. She developed a theory that the only way to attain complete mental and physical well-being was to reduce calories to a minimum so that the body's bad toxins could be washed out. So she started calling herself a fasting specialist and opened an office in Minneapolis. She gained clients by making wild claims of success. She claimed that through extensive research, fasting was the key to all human health and happiness. By following her method, which of course included daily enemas, you would rid the body of toxins that caused imbalances. Linda said, already cases deemed incurable by medical doctors have recovered under my regimen. This includes everything from chronic constipation and diabetes to paralysis and syphilis. In short, I have discovered the secret of eternal health. Imagine that. Well, whether her system was poorly marketed or that most Minnesotans were not willing to voluntarily starve themselves to better health, Linda left the state and moved her base of operations to Olalla, Washington, on the Puget Sound. There, she opened the Wilderness Heights Sanitarium, where patients were made to fast for days, weeks, even months, with the only nourishment being small amounts of tomato or asparagus juice and occasionally a teaspoon of orange juice. For several years, Linda convinced just enough people to buy into her cure to keep the sanitarium open. And her fortunes improved significantly in 1912 when wealthy English sisters Claire and Dorothea Williamson checked into the Wilderness Heights Sanitarium. The sisters were on holiday in the Pacific Northwest, and they had seen an advertisement on the so-called health miracle that Dr. Hazard, as she was now calling herself, advocated. When the sisters visited Linda, she convinced them that their health would improve dramatically if they strictly followed her regimen. Well, Claire and Dorothea followed Linda's fasting cure to the letter, with only one bad result. Claire Williamson starved to death. It was because of this that Linda was brought to trial. And at her trial for manslaughter, it was revealed that Claire weighed less than 50 pounds at the time of her death. It was also proved that Linda had forged Claire's will and stolen most of her valuables including extracting gold fillings from the dead woman's teeth. Dorothea Williamson, who was also on the fasting treatment, only survived because she somehow managed to smuggle a telegram out to alert the family. Fortunately, a family friend did arrive in time to save Dorothea, who weighed less than 60 pounds. Dorothea later testified against Linda Hazard. Because of this, authorities eventually discovered more than 40 people had starved to death while under Linda Hazard's care. Most were buried throughout the property, and the jury found Linda guilty and sentenced her to prison. She served only 2 years and was released on parole in December 1915. In 1916, Washington Governor Ernest Lister granted Linda a full pardon. After that, Linda and the captain moved to New Zealand, where she practiced as a dietitian and an osteopath until 1920, when they returned to Olalla and opened a new sanitarium known publicly as a School of Health. Linda continued to supervise fasts at that second sanitarium until it burned to the ground in 1935. Linda Berfield Hazard died in 1938 while attempting a fasting cure on herself. To this day, old-time Olalla residents refer to Linda's Wilderness Heights Sanitarium as Starvation Heights, courtesy of Star Lake's very own Linda Berfield, fasting specialist. Well, that's it for our second edition of Quarantine History of Otter Tail County. Speaking of Washington, I want to make a shout out to our friends in Palouse, Washington. Stay safe, everyone. And we'll see you next week on Quarantine History of Otter Tail County.